Sometimes the most dangerous decisions in life do not feel dangerous at all when they begin. They feel ordinary, routine, like another long night at work. For Lena Whitmore, the moment that would change everything started on a quiet evening inside a small financial consulting office on the north side of Chicago. The building itself was unimpressive, an aging structure tucked between taller glass towers that dominated the downtown skyline. Most people walking past the office never noticed it, and those who did assumed it was just another firm handling routine accounting work for small businesses. That assumption was exactly what the company relied on. From the outside, the business appeared harmless. Inside, it had secrets that connected directly to one of the most dangerous criminal networks in the city. But Lena Whitmore did not know that yet. At 24 years old, Lena's life had been shaped by responsibility far earlier than she expected. She grew up in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood where financial struggles were part of everyday life. Her father had left when she was young, leaving Lena and her mother to survive on limited income and unpredictable work opportunities. Over time, Lena learned how to adapt. She studied hard in school, earned a scholarship to a local college, and eventually found a job at the consulting office while completing her degree in finance. The job itself was not glamorous. Most nights involved long hours reviewing spreadsheets, organizing financial reports, and verifying transaction records for clients who rarely visited the office in person. But the work paid enough to help cover rent. More importantly, it helped Lena care for the one person who depended on her completely, her mother. After a long illness that had gradually weakened her health, Lena's mother could no longer work. Medical bills had piled up quickly, leaving Lena responsible for keeping their small household afloat. Every late shift at the office felt necessary. Every paycheck meant stability. That night, Lena stayed later than usual. Most of the office lights had already been turned off when she sat alone at her desk, reviewing a new set of financial records delivered earlier that afternoon. The files belonged to a private shipping company that had recently become one of the firm's largest clients. At first glance, the documents looked routine. Transaction logs, shipping contracts, payment confirmations. But something about the numbers immediately caught Lena's attention. Several transactions moved through a complex network of accounts connected to offshore companies. Large sums of money shifted quietly between businesses that technically had no direct connection to each other. Lena frowned slightly as she examined the records more closely. Her education in finance had taught her to recognize patterns hidden within complicated data. And this pattern did not look like ordinary business. It looked like laundering. Money was being moved through multiple shell companies designed to hide its original source. Lena leaned closer to the screen. The amount involved were enormous. Millions of dollars flowing through accounts connected to shipping companies operating across the United States. The deeper she looked into the records, the clearer the truth became. This was not simply financial manipulation. It was organized crime. Someone was using the consulting firm's financial services to quietly process illegal transactions tied to a massive criminal operation. Lena's heart began beating faster. She knew what she should do: report the irregularities to her supervisor. But something stopped her, a quiet feeling that the situation was far more dangerous than a simple accounting error. She opened another file connected to the shipping company. Inside was a detailed list of investors tied to the network. One name appeared repeatedly across several of the documents: Dominic Varela. Lena had heard that name before. Almost everyone in Chicago had. Dominic Varela was rumored to control one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the city. Officially, he was a businessman involved in shipping and logistics companies. But behind that public image, stories circulated about a hidden empire built on smuggling, financial manipulation, and quiet influence over entire industries. Most people treated those rumors like urban legends. But now Lena was staring at financial records that seemed to confirm them. Her stomach tightened. She closed the file quickly. Maybe she was misunderstanding the information. Maybe the records were incomplete. But the uneasy feeling in her chest refused to disappear. At that moment, footsteps echoed somewhere down the hallway. Lena looked up. The office was supposed to be empty. Her co-workers had left nearly an hour earlier. The cleaning crew usually arrived later in the night. The footsteps stopped outside the conference room. Then the door opened. Two men stepped inside the office. They were not employees Lena recognized. Both wore dark suits and moved with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to controlling their surroundings. One of them glanced toward the row of desks. His eyes landed directly on Lena. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the man's gaze shifted to the computer screen in front of her. Lena realized instantly what he had seen. The financial records were still open. The realization sent a wave of panic through her chest. The man's expression changed slightly. Not anger, not surprise, just quiet calculation. And that was enough. Lena stood abruptly from her chair. Her instincts took over before her thoughts could catch up. She grabbed her bag and moved quickly toward the office exit. Behind her, the men began walking faster. Stop. The command came calmly. But Lena had already reached the hallway. Her heart pounded as she rushed toward the stairwell. The office building was nearly empty at this hour, and the silence inside the corridors made every footstep echo loudly. She pushed through the stairwell door and ran down the concrete steps two at a time. Above her, the door opened again. The men were following. By the time Lena reached the street outside, the night air felt cold against her face. Downtown Chicago looked different after midnight. The busy sidewalks had emptied. Most businesses had closed. Only scattered streetlights and distant traffic illuminated the quiet streets. Lena ran. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. Behind her, the door of the office building burst open. The men followed her onto the sidewalk. Their footsteps echoed across the pavement as they began chasing her through the empty streets. Fear pushed Lena faster. She turned corners without thinking, sprinting past dark storefronts and silent intersections. Every shadow felt dangerous. Every passing car made her flinch. Her lungs burned as she ran deeper into unfamiliar streets. The men behind her never seemed to fall far behind. Their footsteps remained steady, patient, confident that eventually she would slow down. Eventually she would make a mistake. And then Lena did exactly that. Desperate to escape, she turned suddenly into a narrow alley between two tall buildings. The darkness inside the alley swallowed her immediately. For a moment, she believed she had finally found a place to hide. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Lena realized she was not alone. Several men already stood inside the alley. They were dressed in dark suits, armed, silent. At the center of them stood a tall man whose calm presence immediately commanded attention. His posture was relaxed, yet every person around him seemed to move according to his quiet authority. Lena froze, because even without recognizing his face, she understood something instinctively. This man was powerful, dangerous, and the moment their eyes met, Lena realized she had just run directly into someone far more terrifying than the men chasing her. The man stepped forward slowly. The guards around him remained perfectly still. Then Lena heard one of them speak his name quietly. Dominic Varela, the most feared Mafia boss in Chicago. And Lena Whitmore had just run straight into him while trying to escape with secrets that could destroy his entire empire. In Chicago's criminal world, power was rarely measured by wealth alone. It was measured by silence. The kind of silence that fell over a room the moment a certain name was spoken. The kind of silence that made rival organizations reconsider their plans before taking a single step forward. In that world, one name carried more weight than most: Dominic Varela. For years, his influence had quietly expanded across Chicago's underground economy. Shipping companies, logistics firms, private security contractors, and international trade networks all operated beneath the surface of his growing empire. Officially, Dominic Varela was a businessman. Unofficially, he was the man who controlled one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the city. Unlike many leaders in organized crime, Dominic rarely appeared in public conflicts. He preferred strategy over spectacle, patience over reckless aggression. That calm approach made him far more dangerous. While other criminal groups fought openly for territory, Dominic built his empire through careful planning and calculated alliances. When conflicts did arise, they ended quickly. Entire organizations had disappeared overnight after challenging his authority. The message had spread through Chicago's criminal networks long ago. Crossing Dominic Varela was not a risk. It was a mistake that rarely ended well. And now Lena Whitmore stood only a few feet away from him inside a narrow alley. Her breath came in uneven bursts after running through the dark streets. The adrenaline that had pushed her forward moments earlier was quickly being replaced by a cold realization. She had escaped one danger, only to run directly into something far worse. Dominic Varela stood at the center of the alley, surrounded by several men who carried themselves with quiet discipline. None of them raised their weapons. None of them moved, but the calm confidence in their posture made it clear they were prepared for anything. Dominic himself looked exactly like the rumors described, tall and composed, dressed in a dark tailor coat that blended effortlessly with the night around him. His expression remained controlled, almost thoughtful, as his eyes studied the young woman who had suddenly appeared in the middle of his meeting. Lena tried to speak, but the words refused to form, because the fear in her chest had nothing to do with the men chasing her anymore. It came from the realization that the man standing in front of her controlled the very criminal empire she had accidentally uncovered. Dominic observed her quietly. Years of experience had taught him how to read people within seconds. Fear was obvious, but fear alone rarely told the whole story. The woman standing in front of him was terrified. That much was clear. But her fear was mixed with something else. Desperation. The kind of desperation that came from someone running for their life. Dominic's attention shifted briefly toward the street behind her. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the alley. The men who had been chasing Lena had finally caught up. They appeared at the entrance moments later, slowing to a stop when they saw who stood inside the narrow space. For a brief moment, the entire alley fell silent. The two men stared at Dominic and guards surrounding him. Recognition appeared instantly in their expressions. Even criminals understood when they had stepped into territory controlled by someone far more powerful. Dominic remained still. His gaze moved calmly between Lena and the men who had been chasing her. The situation became obvious within seconds. A frightened woman, two men desperate to capture her, financial records connected to his organization. The pieces fit together easily. Dominic stepped forward slightly. The movement alone caused attention inside the alley to sharpen. The men behind Lena shifted nervously. They clearly had not expected to encounter Dominic Varela tonight. One of them attempted to recover his confidence. "This situation doesn't concern you." The words sounded forced. Dominic's expression remained unchanged. The man continued, "That woman belongs to our employer." The statement hung awkwardly in the air, because everyone present understood something important. In this part of Chicago, no one made claims like that without considering who they were speaking to. Dominic's attention returned to Lena. Her hand was shaking. Her breathing remained uneven, but something about the way she stood caught his interest. She was afraid, yet she had not collapsed. She had not begged. She was simply trying to survive. Dominic looked back toward the men standing at the entrance of the alley. "Explain." The single word carried quiet authority. The men hesitated. One of them spoke cautiously. "She stole information from a company that belongs to our employer." Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly. Information. The word confirmed his suspicion. Dominic turned his attention back to Lena. Her silence told him everything he needed to know. She had discovered something she was not supposed to see. And now the people chasing her wanted to make sure that secret never reached anyone else. Dominic's mind worked quickly through the possibilities. If Lena had seen financial records connected to his organization, it meant someone inside his network had been careless. Or worse, someone had been hiding something. Dominic disliked both possibilities. The men at the end of the alley began growing impatient. "This situation doesn't involve you," one of them said again. Dominic ignored the statement completely. Instead, he studied Lena's face carefully. In his world, people often lied to protect themselves, but fear rarely lied. And the fear in Lena's eyes told him one important truth. She had not been looking for trouble. Trouble had found her. Dominic finally made his decision. He stepped forward once more. The movement caused his guards to shift slightly, instantly positioning themselves between Lena and the men at the alley entrance. Dominic's voice remained calm. "She's not going anywhere." The two men stared at him in disbelief. One of them attempted to protest. "You don't understand." Dominic raised his hand slightly. The protest ended immediately. The quiet authority in that gesture carried more power than any threat. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Dominic spoke again. His voice was steady, controlled, final. "She's under my protection now." The words settled across the alley like a declaration of ownership. The two men exchanged nervous glances. They understood exactly what that meant. Dominic Varela was not known for making empty claims. Anyone placed under his protection became untouchable. Trying to challenge that protection would start a conflict none of them were prepared to face. After a long moment of hesitation, the men slowly stepped back from the alley. They understood when a situation had become unwinnable. Without another word, they disappeared into the dark street. Silence returned. Lena remained frozen where she stood. Her mind struggled to understand what had just happened. She had expected Dominic to ignore her, or worse, hand her over to the men chasing her. Instead, he had done something she never imagined. He had claimed her. Dominic studied her one last time. Then he turned slightly toward his guards. "Bring her with us." Lena felt the weight of those words immediately, because the moment Dominic Varela decided to protect her, her life stopped belonging to the world she once knew and became part of his instead. Power in the criminal world was rarely announced loudly. Most of the time, it appeared in quiet decisions that no one dared question. And when Dominic Varela decided something, the city usually adjusted around that decision without argument. The alley returned to silence moments after the men chasing Lena disappeared into the dark streets of Chicago. Dominic's guards remained perfectly still, watching the alley entrance to ensure the threat had truly passed. Lena Whitmore stood in the middle of the narrow space, her chest still rising and falling from the panic that had pushed her through the city minutes earlier. The danger had not vanished. It had simply changed shape, because now the person controlling her fate stood directly in front of her. Dominic Varela turned slowly toward her. For several seconds he said nothing. He simply observed. Years of building and protecting an empire had trained him to notice details others missed. The way Lena held her shoulders, the tension in her posture, the fear in her eyes mixed with something else, confusion. She had not expected to be protected. Dominic found that interesting. Most people who ran into his world either begged for mercy or attempted to lie their way out of trouble. Lena had done neither. She had simply run. And that told him something important. She was not part of the criminal networks that normally surrounded him, which meant her presence here was either a coincidence or the result of someone else's mistake. Dominic stepped closer. Lena instinctively took a small step back. The movement caused one of Dominic's guards to shift slightly, but Dominic raised a hand. The guard immediately stopped. Dominic's attention remained fixed on Lena. "You ran from them." The observation came calmly. Lena nodded slowly. Her voice felt fragile when she finally spoke. "Yes." Dominic studied her expression. "Why?" The question sounded simple, but Lena understood its weight. In Dominic Varela's world, information was currency, and right now she was holding something valuable. For a moment she considered lying, but something about Dominic's calm gaze made that feel pointless. "They found out I saw something." Dominic tilted his head slightly. "What?" Lena hesitated before answering. "Financial records." The words caught his interest immediately. Dominic glanced briefly at Victor Calderon, the trusted advisor standing beside him. Victor's expression sharpened. Dominic turned his attention back to Lena. "Explain." Lena swallowed. The cold air in the alley felt heavier with every second. "I work at a consulting office," she said carefully. "Tonight, I was reviewing financial reports for a shipping company." Dominic remained silent. Lena continued. "The transactions didn't make sense." Victor stepped slightly closer. "What kind of transactions?" "Large transfers moving through offshore accounts," Lena replied. "Shell companies connected to shipping routes along the East Coast." Dominic's eyes narrowed. He recognized the pattern instantly. Money laundering. But the details mattered more than the crime itself. "Which company?" he asked. Lena hesitated again. Then she said the name. Victor's expression changed immediately. Dominic noticed the reaction. because the company Lena mentioned was not one of his own operations. It belonged to a rival organization, a network that had quietly expanded into Chicago's shipping industry during the past year. Dominic understood the implications instantly. If Lena had seen their financial records, she had accidentally discovered something extremely valuable, something the rival organization would do anything to keep hidden. Victor spoke quietly. They must have someone inside that office. Dominic nodded slightly, which explained why Lena had been chased the moment she discovered the documents. The rival group clearly believed she understood what the records meant. Dominic turned back toward Lena. Did you copy the files? Lena shook her head quickly. No. Did you send them to anyone? No. Dominic studied her carefully. She looked exhausted, terrified, but she did not look like someone trained to manipulate financial systems. She looked like exactly what she claimed to be, an ordinary employee who had stumbled across something dangerous. That accident had now placed her in the center of a conflict she did not understand. Victor spoke again. If their men were chasing her, they'll keep looking. Dominic knew that already. Rival organizations rarely allowed loose ends to exist. If Lena had seen those records, they would continue searching until they found her, which meant releasing her into the city would accomplish nothing. She would either disappear quietly, or worse, she would be captured again and forced to reveal everything she knew. Dominic considered the situation for several seconds. Then he made another decision. The kind of decision that would alter Lena Whitmore's life completely. He turned toward his man. We're leaving. Victor nodded. The guards immediately moved toward the vehicles parked at the end of the alley. Lena watched the movement with growing confusion. Wait. Dominic paused. She hesitated before speaking again. You're just letting me go? Dominic looked back at her. No. The word landed heavily. Lena felt a sudden wave of uncertainty. What do you mean? Dominic answered calmly. You know too much. The statement made her heart drop. For a moment she feared the worst. But Dominic continued before panic could fully take hold. The men chasing you will not stop. Lena knew that was true. And if they find you again, Dominic said, you won't survive. Silence settled between them. Then Dominic spoke again. You'll stay with me. Lena stared at him in disbelief. That's not necessary. Victor almost smiled slightly at the response. Dominic remained calm. It is... Lena looked toward the dark street beyond the alley. The men who had chased her could return at any moment, and she had no safe place left to go. Dominic stepped toward the waiting vehicles. His guards opened the doors immediately. Bring her, he said quietly. Victor gestured toward the car. Lena hesitated only briefly before following, because deep down she understood something important. Dominic Varela was the only reason she was still alive. The convoy of black vehicles moved quickly through the empty streets of Chicago. Lena sat in the back seat, watching the city lights blur past the window. Her mind struggled to process what had happened in the past hour. Only a short time ago, she had been an ordinary office worker finishing another late shift. Now she was riding to the city under protection of the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago. The car eventually left the downtown district, traveling along a quiet highway that led toward the outskirts of the city. After nearly 30 minutes, the convoy turned onto a long private road lined with tall trees. At the end of the road stood a massive estate surrounded by iron gates and security checkpoints. The gates opened as the vehicles approached. Lena stared through the window. The mansion beyond them looked more like a private fortress than a home. Armed guards monitored the entrance. Security cameras tracked every movement across the property. Dominic stepped out of the vehicle first. His guards immediately moved into position around the entrance. Victor opened Lena's door. She stepped out slowly. The scale of the estate made her feel smaller with every passing second. Dominic waited near the entrance. When Lena approached, he spoke calmly. This is where you'll stay. Lena looked up at the towering mansion. For how long? Dominic's answer came, without hesitation. Until the people who tried to kill you no longer exist. The word sent a chill through her chest, because the way Dominic Varela said them made one thing clear. He had no intention of letting that threat survive for long. Power does not always announce itself through violence. Sometimes it hides behind polished marble floors, quiet hallways, and the calm movements of people who understand exactly who holds control. Lena Whitmore realized at the moment she stepped inside Dominic Varela's estate. The massive iron gates closed slowly behind the convoy of vehicles, sealing the property away from the rest of the city. Outside those gates, Chicago continued its restless movement. Traffic lights flickering through late-night streets, distant sirens echoing across neighborhoods, ordinary people finishing ordinary days. Inside the state, however, the atmosphere felt completely different. Quiet, controlled, almost surgical in its precision. The mansion itself stood at the center of a vast private property surrounded by tall trees and security walls. Floodlights illuminated the outer perimeter, while cameras tracked every movement across the grounds. Several smaller buildings were scattered across the estate: private garages, security stations, communication centers. Each structure had a purpose connected to the organization Dominic Varela controlled. The main mansion looked less like a home and more like the headquarters of a powerful corporation. Tall glass windows reflected the soft lights of the courtyard, while two stone staircases curved upward toward the entrance. Lena followed Dominic inside. The interior revealed even more of the quiet authority that defined the estate. Polished black marble floors stretched across a wide entrance hall. Expensive artwork decorated the walls, while soft lighting created an atmosphere that felt elegant rather than intimidating. But the details beneath that elegance told a different story. Security personnel stood discreetly near every major corridor. Cameras monitored every angle of the hall. Even the staff members moving through the building carried themselves with a level of discipline Lena had never seen in a private residence. This was not simply Dominic Varela's home. It was the center of his empire. A woman wearing a dark uniform approached as Dominic entered. She lowered her head respectfully. "Welcome back, sir." Dominic acknowledged her with a brief nod. "Prepare the guest suite." "Yes, sir." The woman glanced briefly at Lena before leaving to carry out the order. Lena noticed something important in that moment. No one inside the mansion asked questions. No one expressed surprise about her presence. They simply accepted Dominic's decisions without hesitation. Victor Calderon walked beside Dominic as they moved deeper into the mansion. "I'll have the security teams review the area where we found her," Victor said quietly. Dominic nodded. "Do it." Victor continued down a separate corridor, while Dominic guided Lena toward a staircase leading to the upper level. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Lena's thoughts raced as she tried to understand the world she had just entered. She had heard rumors about powerful crime bosses before, but those rumors never described something like this. Dominic Varela's empire did not look chaotic or violent. It looked organized, disciplined, almost corporate in its structure. That realization unsettled her more than anything else, because it meant the man walking beside her had built something far more dangerous than a typical criminal organization. They reached the upper level of the mansion, where several private rooms lined a quiet hallway. Dominic stopped in front of one of the doors. "This will be your room." He opened the door. Inside was a large suite decorated with modern furniture and soft lighting. Tall windows overlooked the estate gardens, while a private sitting area connected to a bedroom that looked more luxurious than anything Lena had experienced in her life. But comfort was not what she noticed first. Her attention went immediately to the small security camera positioned discreetly near the ceiling. Dominic saw her looking at it. "It's for your safety." Lena nodded slowly. She believed him, but the camera also reminded her of something else. Even inside this beautiful room, she was not free. Dominic stepped back toward the hallway. "Rest the night." Lena hesitated before speaking. "What happens tomorrow?" Dominic answered calmly. "Tomorrow we find out why someone tried to kill you." He closed the door quietly behind him. The silence inside the room felt strange after everything that had happened during the night. Lena walked slowly toward the window and looked out across the massive estate. The gates in the distance reminded her that leaving was not an option, but another thought slowly formed in her mind. If Dominic Varela had not appeared in that alley when he did, she might already be dead. The realization made something else clear. For the moment, this mansion was the only safe place left in her world. Morning arrived quietly across the estate. Lena woke to the soft light of sunrise filtering through the tall windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories returned all at once. The financial records, the men chasing her, Dominic Varela, and the world she had stepped into without warning. A knock sounded at the door. A member of the staff entered carrying a tray of breakfast. "Mr. Varela will see you shortly." Lena thanked her quietly. An hour later, she was escorted downstairs into a large room filled with digital screens and long conference tables. Dominic stood near one of the screens, reviewing several financial reports. Victor Calderon stood beside him. Both men turned as Lena entered. Dominic gestured toward the table. "Tell us everything you saw." Lena described the financial records she had discovered inside the consulting office. She explained how the money moved through offshore accounts connected to shipping companies across the East Coast. Victor listened carefully while comparing her explanation with information already displayed on the screen. After several minutes, Dominic walked closer. "Did you notice any names connected to the transactions?" Lena thought carefully. There were several companies listed. Victor nodded. Shell corporations. Lena continued. But one thing looked strange. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "The transfers were not random," Lena said. "They followed a pattern connected to specific shipping routes." Victor studied the screen. "That suggests coordinated movement." Lena nodded. "Yes." Dominic remained silent for a moment. Then he turned toward Victor. "Pull up the records for those routes." Victor typed several commands into the system. The screen changed immediately. A complex map of shipping lanes appeared across the display. Dozens of financial transactions moved along the routes Lena had described. Dominic studied the information carefully. Then something in the data caught his attention. His expression changed slightly. Victor noticed. "What is it?" Dominic pointed to a sequence of transactions hidden inside the financial network. "These accounts." Victor looked closer. Recognition appeared instantly. "They belong to our logistics division." Lena felt a sudden wave of confusion. "You mean your company is involved?" Dominic's voice remained calm. "No." He tapped the screen again. "These transfers were authorized from inside my organization." Victor's expression hardened. "That's impossible." Dominic continued examining the records, but the pattern was undeniable. The financial network Lena had discovered was not simply connected to a rival organization. It was being operated from somewhere inside Dominic Varela's own empire, and that meant someone within his organization had been secretly working against him. Empires rarely fall because of enemies outside their walls. Most of the time, they collapse because someone inside quietly unlocks the door. Dominic Varela understood that truth better than most people alive, which was exactly why the discovery Lena Whitmore had made inside those financial records disturbed him more than any direct attack ever could. Inside the operations room of the mansion, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The digital screens that once displayed ordinary business reports now revealed something far more dangerous. Shipping routes stretched across a map of the eastern United States, while financial transfers moved like glowing threads through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. At first glance, the transactions appeared complex but legitimate. But when Lena pointed out the pattern connecting those transfers, the illusion quickly collapsed. Someone inside Dominic's empire had been quietly redirecting millions of dollars toward accounts connected to a rival criminal network. And the longer Dominic studied the data, the clearer one fact became. This betrayal had not started recently. It had been happening for years. Victor Calderon stood beside the main console, studying the same information with growing concern. "If these transfers go back as far as the records show," Victor said quietly, "then whoever is responsible has been operating inside our system for a long time." Dominic said nothing. His attention remained fixed on the screen as the financial pathways unfolded in front of him. Years of experience had taught him how to read patterns inside complex financial structures. The numbers never lied, and the numbers revealed something deeply troubling. The accounts responsible for authorizing the transfers belonged to one of the highest divisions inside his organization, Logistics Command. Victor noticed the same detail. That department answers directly to the Executive Council. Dominic nodded slowly, which meant the betrayal was not coming from a low-level employee. Someone with real authority had been manipulating his empire from within. Lena stood quietly across the room, watching the investigation unfold. Only hours earlier, she had been an ordinary office worker, reviewing spreadsheets for clients she barely knew. Now she was standing inside the command center, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Chicago, while its leader uncovered evidence of betrayal. The scale of the situation felt overwhelming, but Lena forced herself to focus, because the financial patterns she had discovered were the only reason Dominic had begun looking in the right direction. Victor opened another file on the screen. These shipments correspond to the transfers. Dominic leaned closer. What kind of shipments? Victor traced the routes across the digital map. Industrial cargo moving through private shipping lanes. Lena studied the data carefully. Then something clicked in her mind. These shipments aren't random. Victor looked at her. What do you mean? Lena stepped closer to the screen. The routes follow a pattern connected to specific port authorities. Dominic noticed a realization in her voice. Explain. Lena pointed to several cities on the map. Baltimore, Savannah, New Orleans. These ports have one thing in common. Victor frowned slightly. Private inspection contracts. Lena nodded. Yes. Which means whoever controls those contracts can move cargo without outside oversight. The implication spread quickly through the room. Someone inside Dominic's organization had been using the shipping network to quietly transfer illegal cargo through controlled ports, and the money generated from those shipments had been funneled through the financial system Lena had discovered. Dominic's expression darkened slightly. This isn't simple corruption. Victor agreed. This is a long-term operation. Dominic turned his attention back to the screen. If someone inside my organization has been building their own financial network using our shipping routes, Victor finished the thought. Then they're preparing to replace us. Silence filled the operations room, because the meaning behind that conclusion was impossible to ignore. Someone inside Dominic's empire had been quietly building the foundation for a rival power structure, and now that structure was strong enough to challenge him directly. Lena felt the tension in the room grow heavier with every passing second. She realized something important in that moment. The danger surrounding her had never really been about the financial records she discovered. Those records had simply exposed a much larger problem, a conspiracy powerful enough to start a war between criminal empires. Victor continued analyzing the data. Several more minutes passed before he finally spoke again. I think we found the entry point. Dominic looked up. Victor highlighted a sequence of transactions connected to one particular shipping contract. These transfers began shortly after this company joined our network. Dominic studied the name. It belonged to a logistics firm that had expanded rapidly across several East Coast ports during the past decade. Victor opened the ownership records. The company appeared legitimate. Private investors. Legal corporate structure. But Dominic recognized something in the background data. A hidden connection between the company's investors and a name he had not seen in years. His eyes narrowed slightly. Victor noticed a change immediately. You know them? Dominic nodded. Yes. Lena looked between them. Who? Dominic spoke quietly. Marco Serrano. Victor exhaled slowly. That explains everything. Lena frowned. Who is that? Victor answered before Dominic could. Serrano used to run one of the largest smuggling networks on the East Coast. Lena felt a chill run through her chest. What happened to him? Dominic's voice remained calm. He disappeared. Victor corrected the statement. He disappeared after losing a war. Lena understood the meaning immediately. A war with Dominic Varela. Victor continued studying the financial records. If Serrano has been rebuilding his network all this time, Dominic finished the thought. Then he's ready to return. Lena looked back at the map, displaying the shipping routes. The scale of the operation now made terrifying sense. Marco Serrano had not simply been hiding after losing his empire. He had been quietly rebuilding it using Dominic's own system. Every shipment, every financial transfer, every secret alliance hidden within the network Lena discovered had been preparing for one moment. The moment Serrano could step out of the shadows and challenge Dominic Varela directly. Dominic finally stepped back from the screen. His expression had returned to the calm focus that defined him. But the room felt colder now, more dangerous, because everyone present understood what came next. Victor looked at him carefully. If Serrano has built this much infrastructure inside our network, Dominic nodded, then he's not planning another quiet operation. Victor's voice dropped slightly. He's planning a war. Dominic turned toward the large window overlooking the estate. Outside, the morning sun had begun rising over the distant tree line. For most of Chicago, the day would unfold like any other. But inside Dominic Varela's empire, the balance of power had just shifted. And Lena Whitmore realized something terrifying as she watched him standing there. The information she discovered had not only saved her life, it had ignited a conflict powerful enough to reshape the entire criminal world around them. Because Marco Serrano was no longer hiding. He was preparing to take back the empire he once lost. Wars between criminal empires rarely begin with a single gunshot. They begin quietly, with disrupted shipments, with disappearing money, with alliances that suddenly shift in the shadows. And by the time the first public strike happens, the battlefield has already been prepared. For Dominic Varela, that moment arrived faster than expected. Only 2 days after the conspiracy inside his organization was uncovered, the first attack came. It happened at one of his shipping terminals along the southern edge of Chicago. A routine cargo transfer scheduled to leave before sunrise suddenly stopped when several armed vehicles blocked the entrance to the dockyard. Within minutes, men working for Marco Serrano seized control of the shipment and disappeared before Dominic's security teams could respond. The cargo itself was not particularly valuable, but the message behind the attack was unmistakable. Serrano was no longer hiding. He was making his presence known. Inside Dominic's mansion, the operations center erupted into activity the moment the news arrived. Large digital screens displayed maps of shipping routes across multiple states, while advisors and security coordinators moved quickly between workstations. Victor Calderon stood at the center of the room, analyzing incoming reports. "They're testing us," Victor said calmly. Dominic stood nearby, watching the information unfold. "Yes." Victor tapped a command into the system. Another set of alerts appeared on the screen. 2 warehouses in Milwaukee reported similar disruptions this morning. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly. Serrano's network was moving faster than expected. Years of preparation had clearly given the rival leader enough infrastructure to strike multiple locations at once. And that meant the war had already begun. Across the room, Lena Whitmore stood near one of the consoles, studying the same reports. The world she had stepped into only days earlier now felt impossibly larger than she imagined. What began as a desperate escape through Chicago's streets had evolved into something far more dangerous. She was witnessing the beginning of a war between 2 criminal empires, and somehow she had become part of it. Victor glanced toward her. "You started this chain reaction." The statement was not an accusation. It was simply a fact. Lena nodded slowly. "I know," Dominic spoke, without looking away from the screens. "And because of that, you may be the only person who can see what Serrano is doing." Lena looked at him. "You think I understand his strategy?" Dominic turned toward her. "You discovered the financial pattern before anyone else did." The quiet confidence in his voice surprised her. Only days earlier, Dominic Varela had treated her as someone who needed protection. Now he was treating her like someone whose instincts mattered. That shift carried weight. Lena stepped closer to the console. "Show me the shipment routes." Victor adjusted the display. Several lines stretched across the digital map, connecting Chicago's ports to cities across the eastern United States. Red markers highlighted the location Serrano had already attacked. Lena studied the map carefully. At first, the pattern looked random. Different cities, different types of cargo, different times of day. But the more she looked, the more something began to stand out. "These aren't random attacks." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Lena pointed to the map. "The locations form a line." Victor leaned closer. Dominic watched silently. "The shipments they're hitting all connect to one main financial hub," Lena continued. She highlighted a point on the map. "Philadelphia." Victor frowned slightly. "That's one of our largest logistics centers." Dominic nodded slowly. Serrano was not just attacking individual shipments. He was systematically weakening the network that connected Dominic's East Coast operations, a strategy designed to isolate Chicago from the rest of the empire. Victor folded his arms. He's cutting supply routes. Yes, Lena said, but that's not the real objective. Dominic looked at her. What is? Lena studied the map one more time. If Serrano controls the East Coast logistics chain, he controls the financial network tied to it. Victor understood immediately. That would give him leverage over every company connected to those ports. Dominic nodded once. He's not trying to destroy the empire. He's trying to take it. Silence settled over the operations room, because that strategy was far more dangerous than simple territorial conflict. Serrano was attempting a takeover, and the infrastructure he built inside Dominic's network had given him the perfect starting point. Victor turned toward Dominic. We can shut down the eastern routes temporarily. Dominic shook his head. That would confirm Serrano's strategy is working. Lena spoke quietly. He wants you to react emotionally. Dominic looked at her again. The statement sounded simple, but it revealed something important. She was beginning to understand how this world worked. Dominic stepped closer to the map. Then we respond strategically. Victor nodded. I'll move our shipments through secondary ports. Dominic added another instruction, and reinforced the Chicago terminals. The war for the empire had begun. Over the next several days, the conflict escalated quickly. Serrano's network continued targeting logistics hubs connected to Dominic's operations. Cargo shipments disappeared. Financial accounts were disrupted. Private security teams loyal to Serrano attempted to intimidate Dominic's business partners. But Dominic's response was just as precise. Instead of retaliating blindly, he reorganized the entire shipping network. Routes shifted. Alliances changed. Companies loyal to Serrano suddenly found their own financial systems under pressure. It became a battle of strategy rather than brute force. And throughout it all, Lena remained inside the operations center watching the conflict unfold. The more she studied the financial data connected to Serrano's attacks, the more she noticed something unusual. His network was moving with incredible coordination. Too much coordination. For a moment, she wondered if Serrano had access to information far beyond what Dominic's trader had provided. Late one night, while reviewing a series of encrypted financial transfers, Lena finally saw the detail that explained everything. Her eyes widened slightly. Dominic. He turned from the console across the room. What is it? Lena rotated the screen toward him. These accounts funding Serrano's operations. Victor leaned closer. They're offshore corporations. Yes, Lena said, but look at who owns them. Dominic studied the data carefully. Then his expression darkened, because the names behind the financial network did not belong to criminal organizations. They belonged to legitimate investment groups, political donors, corporate executives, people who operated far above the level of ordinary organized crime. Victor spoke quietly. This isn't just Serrano. Dominic nodded slowly. No. Lena felt the weight of the discovery settle over the room, because the evidence revealed something even more dangerous than a rival mafia leader rebuilding his empire. Marco Serrano was not the true architect of the war. He was simply the weapon. And somewhere behind him, someone far more powerful was pulling the strings. Powerful men often believe they understand the battlefield before the war begins. But the most dangerous wars are the ones that hide their true enemies behind layers of deception. For Dominic Varela, that realization arrived the moment Lena Whitmore uncovered the hidden financial network supporting Marco Serrano's campaign against his empire. At first, the conflict looked like a familiar rivalry, a defeated criminal leader rebuilding his strength and attempting to reclaim power. But the deeper Dominic examined the information Lena had discovered, the clearer one fact became. Serrano was not powerful enough to organize something this complex on his own. Someone else had been financing the war. Someone who understood both the criminal underworld and the legitimate financial systems that control global trade. Inside the operations center of the mansion, the digital screens now displayed a far more complicated map than the one Dominic had studied days earlier. The shipping routes and smuggling networks were still visible, but new layers of information had been added. Corporate investments, political campaign donations, private banking transactions that connected influential figures to companies secretly funding Serrano's operations. Victor Calderon studied the data quietly. This isn't just corruption, Victor said. It's coordination. Dominic nodded. Years of it. The financial records Lena had uncovered revealed something disturbing. Several major investment groups tied to national political figures had quietly funneled millions of dollars into shell companies connected to Serrano's logistics network. The transactions were carefully hidden beneath layers of legitimate business deals. But once Lena traced a pattern, the entire structure became visible. Serrano's empire was not rising from the ashes of his old network. It was being built with the financial support of people who operated far above the level of organized crime. Lena stood near one of the consoles, studying the same records. The scale of the conspiracy still felt difficult to process. Only days earlier she had been running through dark streets trying to survive. Now she was standing inside the command center of a criminal empire, while uncovering a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of corporate and political power. Dominic watched her carefully as she analyzed the information. The calm confidence she showed while working through the financial data surprised him. She was no longer reacting like someone trapped in a dangerous situation. She was thinking like someone trying to understand it. Victor turned toward her. You've been looking at this longer than we have. Lena nodded slightly. The pattern is becoming clearer. Dominic stepped closer. What do you see? Lena highlighted several transactions on the screen. These accounts belong to investment groups that specialize in infrastructure projects. Victor studied the names. They fund shipping terminals and port construction. Lena nodded. Yes, which means if Serrano controls those ports. Victor finished the thought. He controls the trade routes. Dominic remained silent for several seconds. Then he spoke quietly. This isn't just about criminal territory. Lena looked at him. No, this is about controlling the supply chain. The implications were enormous. Whoever controlled the ports and shipping routes along the East Coast could influence billions of dollars in international trade. Serrano's war against Dominic was simply the first stage of a much larger plan. Victor folded his arms. So Serrano takes the empire, and the investors behind him control the profits. Dominic nodded once. Exactly. Lena felt a chill run through her thoughts. The conspiracy she had uncovered was no longer just a conflict between criminal organizations. It was a strategic takeover of an entire economic network. And Dominic Varela stood directly in the path of that takeover. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Lena understood the burden Dominic carried. Every decision he made affected not only his organization, but the countless industries connected to his network. The shipping routes, the security companies, the logistics firms that depended on his operations. Dominic was not just protecting his empire, he was protecting an entire system built around it. That realization changed the way Lena looked at him. She had once believed he was simply a powerful criminal leader. Now she saw something more complicated. A strategist responsible for maintaining control over a world that most people never even knew existed. Dominic noticed a shift in her expression. You understand now. Lena nodded slowly. Yes. Victor interrupted their thoughts. We still need proof connecting the investors directly to Serrano. Dominic turned back to the screens. That's where this ends. He pointed to a cluster of transactions near the center of the financial map. These companies share the same parent investment group. Victor examined the information carefully. That group operates out of Washington. Dominic nodded. And their primary political sponsor sits on the Senate Trade Committee. The silence in the room grew heavier, because that meant the conspiracy was not simply about money. It was about influence, control over legislation that could shape the future of global trade. Victor exhaled slowly. If we expose his network, Serrano loses his funding. Dominic agreed, and the political figures behind it lose their protection. Lena stepped closer to the screen. There's one more thing. Both men looked at her. She opened another financial report connected to Serrano's operations. These payments. Victor leaned closer. They're moving through a private security contractor. Dominic recognized the company immediately. It had once been one of his own, before it was quietly sold to new investors 3 years earlier. Victor understood the significance as well. They've been inside our network for years. Dominic nodded slowly. Yes. Lena looked between them, which means Serrano's operation didn't begin recently. Dominic finished the thought. It began the moment that company changed ownership. Victor studied the screen again. That explains how they accessed our shipping routes. Lena stepped back slightly. The final pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. The war against Dominic Varela had been planned long before Serrano reappeared. Powerful investors had slowly infiltrated his network through legitimate business acquisitions. Serrano was simply the figure they placed in charge of the takeover. Dominic finally turned away from the screen. His expression had returned to the calm determination that defined him. The war ends now. Victor looked at him. You have a plan. Dominic nodded once. Yes. He turned toward Lena. For a moment the room grew quiet. Then Dominic spoke calmly. You help reveal the entire structure of this conspiracy. Lena felt the weight of those words immediately. Without you, we would still be fighting the wrong enemy. Victor added quietly. She changed the strategy. Dominic nodded. Yes. He stepped closer to the operations console and began entering a series of commands. Within seconds, several secure communication channels opened across the screens. Messages began moving rapidly through Dominic's network of allies, shipping partners, financial institutions, private intelligence contractors. Every connection he had built over the years was about to be used. Victor watched the messages spread across the system. This will expose everyone involved. Dominic's voice remained calm. That's the point. Lena understood what he was doing. Instead of attacking Serrano directly, Dominic was preparing to expose the financial network behind him. The moment those investors were revealed publicly, Serrano would lose protection that allowed him to operate. The empire threatening Dominic's world would collapse from within. Dominic finished sending the final message. Then he looked back at the screens. The war that had begun with secret financial transfers and hidden alliances was about to reach its final stage. And when Dominic Varela made his next move, every powerful figure involved in conspiracy would feel the consequences. Some moments feel like accidents while they are happening. Random, unfortunate, even disastrous. But only later do people realize those moments were actually turning points that quietly redirected the course of their lives. For Lena Whitmore, that moment had been the night she ran blindly through the dark streets of Chicago and collided with the most powerful man in the city. At the time, she believed she had made the worst mistake of her life. Now she understood something very different. That collision had started a chain of events powerful enough to change an entire empire. Inside Dominic Varela's mansion, the final stage of the conflict had already begun. The secure communication channels Dominic opened hours earlier were now spreading information across dozens of financial institutions and investigative networks. Every transaction connected to the hidden investment groups backing Marco Serrano was being exposed. Banking regulators began freezing accounts. Corporate partners quietly withdrew their investments. Private intelligence contractors released documents connecting several powerful political donors to Serrano's expanding criminal operations. Within hours, the conspiracy that had spent years hiding inside legitimate financial systems began collapsing. The strength of Serrano's empire had never been his organization alone. It had been the powerful investors funding him. Without their protection, his entire network suddenly became vulnerable. Victor Calderon watched the incoming reports from across the country. Accounts in New York just froze $30 million connected to Serrano's logistics companies. Dominic nodded calmly. That removes his shipping infrastructure. Victor checked another report. Several of his corporate partners are already distancing themselves. The collapse was happening faster than even Dominic expected. Years of hidden alliances were unraveling in a matter of hours. But Dominic knew something important. Marco Serrano would not disappear quietly. Men like Serrano never accepted defeat without trying to reclaim control one final time. And that moment came the following night. A private meeting was arranged at one of Serrano's abandoned warehouses near the Chicago riverfront. Victor had already confirmed the intelligence. Serrano would be there, desperate, cornered, and ready to fight. Dominic arrived shortly before midnight with a small group of trusted security advisors. The warehouse stood alone along the river, surrounded by empty shipping containers and quiet docks. The wind carried the distant sound of water, moving beneath the steel bridges overhead. Inside the warehouse, several lights illuminated the central floor where Serrano waited. He looked older than Dominic remembered. Years in hiding had hardened his features, but the anger in his eyes remained unchanged. "You destroyed everything," Serrano said quietly as Dominic approached. Dominic's voice remained calm. "You built your empire on stolen foundations." Serrano laughed bitterly. "You think you're any different?" Dominic did not respond, because he understood the truth behind Serrano's accusation. Both of them had built their power inside a world where rules were defined by strength rather than morality. But Serrano had made one mistake. He had underestimated the woman who uncovered his entire operation. Serrano glanced toward Lena, standing beside Victor near the entrance of the warehouse. "So that's the one who ruined everything." Lena felt the weight of his attention immediately. For a moment she understood just how dangerous the situation still was. Serrano had lost his financial backing. He had lost his political protection. But men like him were most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. Dominic stepped forward. "This ends tonight." Serrano studied him carefully. Then he slowly lowered his head. "You're right." The words carried a strange sense of acceptance. But the next movement came too quickly for most people to react. Serrano's hand moved toward the weapon hidden beneath his jacket. Dominic's guards responded instantly. Within seconds, a confrontation ended. The war that threatened Dominic's empire for months finished in the quiet darkness of that empty warehouse. Without Serrano's leadership, the remaining pieces of his organization collapsed quickly. The criminal network he had spent years rebuilding dissolved almost overnight. Shipping companies returned to Dominic's control. Financial systems stabilized. And the powerful investors who once believed they could manipulate the criminal world quietly disappeared from public attention. Inside Chicago's underground economy, one fact became clear. Dominic Varela now controlled the strongest empire the city had ever seen. Weeks passed as life inside the mansion slowly returned to normal. Operations resumed. Alliances were rebuilt. And the war that had nearly destroyed Dominic's network faded into history. But for Lena Whitmore, the end of the conflict brought a different question. Her presence inside the mansion had always been temporary. At least that was what she believed. The night she ran into Dominic had forced her into his world. But now the war was over, which meant she finally had a choice. One evening, she stood outside the mansion, overlooking the quiet gardens beneath the fading sunlight. Dominic joined her a moment later. "You're thinking about leaving," he said calmly. Lena looked toward the distant gates at the end of the property. "Yes." The answer was honest. Her old life still existed somewhere beyond those gates. Her mother, her career, the future she once believed was waiting for her. Dominic understood the conflict in her thoughts. "You were never meant to be part of this world." Lena looked at him. "Neither were you." The comment surprised him slightly. Lena continued quietly. "Power like yours doesn't come from wanting it. It comes from learning how to survive." Dominic studied her carefully. The woman who had once run into his world terrified and desperate now spoke with calm understanding. The change in her was undeniable, and he realized something important in that moment. The accident that brought her into his life had changed far more than his strategy during the war. It had changed him. Dominic finally spoke again. "If you leave, you'll be safe." Lena nodded. "And if I stay?" Dominic's answer came, without hesitation. "Then you'll help shape the future of this empire." Silence settled between them as the sun disappeared behind the trees. For the first time since that chaotic night in the alley, Lena understood something clearly. The moment she collided with Dominic Varela had not simply saved her life. It had connected their destinies in a way neither of them could ignore. Months later, Lena often found herself thinking back to that moment. The sound of footsteps behind her. The desperate turn into the alley. The instant she realized she had run straight into the most dangerous man in Chicago. At the time, she believed it was the worst accident of her life. Now she knew the truth. That accident had changed everything. And the Mafia boss who claimed her protection that night had never truly let her go.